Um, I'm Tom Bombelles. I'm the head of global health at the World Intellectual Property Organization. And I'd like to first just briefly explain what WIPO is and what we're doing in the field of global health, because we are not a health organization. There's another United Nations agency in Geneva. It's called the World Health Organization, and their mandate is health. We are also not a development agency per se. We are the specialized United Nations agency with a specific mandate to support the development of an intellectual property system and to find ways to make sure that the system, various forms of intellectual property, can work to support development for all countries at all levels of development. It has its roots going back to about the 1972, when we were officially chartered. And for most of our history, we have been largely a technical agency. Lion's share of our work involves the support of treaties that are administered by our member states under our aegis, and those treaties set minimum standards and provide facilities for the registration of various forms of intellectual property, such as patent, copyrights, trademarks, but also industrial designs, appellations of origin, et cetera, et cetera. We are, interestingly enough, the only United Nations agency that is basically self-supporting. We get virtually no funding from member states. 93% of our funding comes from basically user fees, that is, organizations which use these treaty systems that are set up through negotiations. And then, for example, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, if somebody wants to file a patent and use this system, which is, I'm not going to go into now what that involves, but the idea is to simplify and make it easier to get patent protection. In the countries where you're interested, patents are still territorial. They're granted on a country-by-country basis. Well, there are fees associated with that. So if you're looking for an endorsement of a patent-free zone, please don't come to WIPO. We believe in patents, and we can talk about that. However, it's been a long time since intellectual property has been just a dry, technical, legal issue. I come to WIPO, I've been there for 5 years, and I come to this after a 20-year career in the pharmaceutical industry. And so obviously going back to at least the 1990s, when the very difficult controversy about access to AIDS medicines in poor countries and patents sort of exploded on the public policy scene. Everybody well understands that things like intellectual property have a very important public policy and political dimension. So when Francis Gurry, our Director General, was elected Director General in 2008, one of the first things he did was to say that he wanted to develop the internal capacity in WIPO to engage in the public policy aspects of intellectual property. And I came over to Geneva and he asked me to develop some projects with the private sector, starting in the health field, since I have a background in the pharma industry, to do exactly that, to show that intellectual property can serve its designated purpose, which is to stimulate new or more innovation, even in areas where traditionally it hasn't done. So WIPO research is, among other things, about catalyzing research into neglected tropical diseases. I also enjoy the distinction of perhaps being the most undereducated person in the room. I'm not a PhD scientist like almost all of you, or medical doctor. I come to this issue from a policy and political background. So, in other words, when I define catalyst, it's from a pretty basic level. But a catalyst, as far as I understand it, is something that either makes a reaction possible or makes a reaction more efficient without being consumed itself in the process. So that's what WIPO research is. It is a catalyst to stimulate more innovation in neglected tropical diseases. How do we do that? We have created a platform for the sharing of intellectual property assets and resources in order to, as I said, catalyze more R&D in this neglected area, including malaria and tuberculosis. We call these diseases neglected tropical diseases. Well, neglected has meaning. And one of the meanings of that is there should be and could be more innovation directed there. Again, not to waste time and try not to make Luis the only speaker who stayed within 15 minutes, but to say that we look at what we could do. This is clearly an area of market failure in a number of areas. There's not a huge economic return if you come up with a new and better treatment for schistosomiasis, but still the human need, the clinical need, the medical need is there. So we, and as I'll describe how we do that, we try to use our role in the system to stimulate more R&D in this neglected field. A little tagline that I came up with myself based on an advertising slogan for British Petroleum in the United States, which is BP. I call WIPO research BP, Beyond Patents. One of the negative consequences of the public policy attention on intellectual property as it relates to public health is that I think intellectual property got oversimplified and reduced in the public mind in many ways to just patents. Well, patents are just one legal expression of intellectual property. Intellectual property is really a way to describe knowledge. And therefore, in order to make WIPO research useful to the scientific research community, it can't be about patents. It has to be about intellectual property assets and resources. That includes compounds, technologies, know-how, very important. Again, I don't need to tell you. Regulatory data, access to research facilities, hosting arrangements, which I'll describe a little bit later. So how does it work? In essence, we host a database which lists the kinds of assets and resources that scientists and other researchers can access from our members if they have an interest in this, in something that's listed. And I'll give some examples later on. Very importantly, we have our key NGO partner, and we have actually GSK to thank for this because they brought BVGH into this project. One of the things I've learned in the course of my career is in order to be successful, you have to identify what it is you can do, but just as importantly, if not more so sometimes, what it is that you cannot do. We as WIPO, we can't match scientific needs with availability of scientific information or other kinds of research information. Our partner, BioVentures for Global Health, has PhD scientists on staff, and they're the ones who talk with our members, see who's working on what, see who has what kind of assets that they might be willing to license to others. So that partnership is crucial. Our universe is described by 19 neglected tropical diseases and conditions defined by the WHO in 2011 when we launched WIPO research, plus malaria and tuberculosis. A couple reasons why malaria and tuberculosis are included. I think, frankly, our project would have been too small if we had just stayed with the WHO list. And clearly, there's a need there, even though, formally speaking, malaria and TB are not NTDs. Again, where do we, as the World Intellectual Property Organization, justify some of our activity in this area besides what I already described, which is fine. I always do an excellent job of convincing myself. However, it's always good to have outside validation as well. So we have a very clear mandate from our member states in the development agenda, consistent with what I said earlier about intellectual property being a important public policy issue now. Developing countries in particular, they see the success and the wealth, frankly, that's created through the use of the intellectual property system in developed countries, and they want to make sure that they have access to the same possibilities. So our member states asked us to make sure that our activities include things like technology and knowledge transfer, capacity building, and specifically licensing of intellectual property to foster development. The UN Development Goals, which are well known to everyone in this room and have been referenced in several presentations, include 3 goals that are health related, 2 of which are arguably directly related to this field of activity: reducing child mortality, obviously childhood disease, and combating HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. So we see that we have a specific niche, as said, as noted by our Director General when we launched. WIPO research is a wonderful opportunity for capacity building and R&D and innovation, sharing and creating connections, which hopefully and can in turn lead to the advancement of knowledge and discoveries. So our value proposition, with my sort of private sector background, I always think in those terms. We help galvanize the industry and public sector and make their connections. From the policy perspective, part of our role as the specialized agency for intellectual property is to try to move the discourse on intellectual property to one where intellectual property is seen as a tool to foster innovation, including in unmet health needs, rather than, frankly, the negative characterization, which is always, oh, the patent is a barrier to access and people are dying as a result. We also, a lot of discussion about this today and on the panel hopefully as well, that in the 21st century, where everyone is moving towards a network global health innovation system, that's open source, open innovation, characterize it however you will. Clearly the 20th century model of closed innovation loops is no longer the only one. And we also demonstrate that it is possible to create open-based intellectual property approaches within the system. So all of those are core values to us as WIPO. Here, just the licensing terms for licenses that are negotiated under WIPO research. And here, I should say, my own contribution to this debate about what is open source and what is open innovation. Open source to me means that information or assets or some type of intellectual property or other knowledge is made available to sort of all comers with very few conditions. Open innovation is something is available, but is still available under license. So when our members list intellectual property assets on our website, that doesn't mean it's just available for somebody to come and get. It means that the licensee is willing to negotiate a license, which is gratis, to a qualified researcher anywhere in the world, but consistent with these licensing terms, which you'll see are actually designed to make sure that access is available and it's basically gratis. So the licensing terms for research, development, and manufacture are royalty-free. Licensing terms for the sale of any product that comes out of a WIPO research agreement, collaboration, must be royalty-free for sales in all least developed countries, and sales in all other developing countries, the royalty terms can be negotiated in good faith. Licensees are encouraged to retain ownership of new intellectual property that they create. Again, because we are WIPO, we believe in intellectual property. We believe that it's a tool to achieve certain ends, so we believe that if somebody creates new intellectual property, that they should certainly have the option, if they so choose, to retain ownership of it. And the existing intellectual property owner has no reach-through claims to new IP materials or derivatives of materials that are generated by these agreements. So these are some of the conditions that Luis alluded to in his presentation just now. The actual language itself is in our guiding principles, which is essentially our charter document. It was written by a committee of lawyers. Having said that, I think it's relatively short at 4.5 pages, and it is relatively understandable. So you're certainly welcome to read it yourself on the website, where it's in 6 languages, all 6 official UN languages, plus Portuguese. What is the structure of WIPO research? First of all, as I mentioned, there's a global comprehensive database. It's maintained by WIPO. It lists technology and related information that is available for discussion in terms of licensing, and it's publicly accessible. There are absolutely no barriers to entry, not even like if you registered with the cloud Wi-Fi here, you had to click on I accept the conditions. Not even that level of barrier. It's not really a barrier, but not even that level is here in WIPO research. It's completely 100% accessible. The partnership hub, again, I already alluded to this and I'll describe it in a little bit more detail, but it's absolutely the key function of WIPO research, knowing what we could do as a UN agency. We can convene people, we can bring them under our umbrella, but we cannot connect the partners and develop the relationships. And they also facilitate some of the hosting arrangements, which are essentially research sabbaticals for developing country scientists, which I'll also give you a few examples of. And then we can also provide some supporting services to our members, especially in developing countries. We can provide, we link with WHO, and we have access to their NTD and TDR sections, and can offer technical advice through them, through us to them. We can link with other WIPO services for developing countries, such as IP management and training, access to specialized journals at concessionary rates for subscribers in developing and least developed countries. And we also provide ongoing recruitment of new providers and users. Just a quick list of some content, basic categories of content in the database. Patents, that is access to patents. Preclinical candidate compounds, screening or HITS data, enabling technology platforms. One of our members, a biotech company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Alnylam, has a very interesting RNA-based discovery technology. Access to registered and marketed products. I'll give a couple of examples later. Hit to lead data, diagnostic tools, and other types of data and services. This is a slide I'm particularly proud of because we launched WIPO research in 2011, in October 2011, so with 31 members. 2.5 years later, we have 84 members, and they are distributed around the world. I'm also very proud of saying that we put a lot of emphasis on, when we launched, we had 2 members in the African continent. Now we have quite a few more. In fact, the graphic doesn't show all the new members. So there are actually more members in Africa than there are listed there. And that was a very important priority for us in the policy section, from the policy point of view, because we have to show that this project can benefit developing countries. And also, at such time when some of our collaborations turn into compounds that have to go into clinical trials, well, you can't do a clinical trial on schistosomiasis in London or Canada or the United States. I mean, you can for safety, but not for efficacy. You have to do it where the disease is. So we want to help do our part to build networks where there is the disease. This is just a partial list of some of our agreements. So just to show you what access to registered compounds mean. Merck, for example, this American Merck & Co. Inc. with the University of California, San Francisco. Researchers at UCSF are working on a theory that statins may have properties, certain efficacy against the parasite that causes schistosomiasis. They needed access to physical compounds of statins, as well as ultimately or eventually access to regulatory and other types of data. Through WIPO research, we made it very easy for Merck to supply UCSF with information and compound, and we made it easy for UCSF to get access to that. The drug companies joined our project or helped create our project because they want to do this kind of partnering. But obviously they can't spend a lot of time to do it. It's not in their core mandate, and in the current commercial environment, the days where they could have whole, multiple full-time equivalents just working on this kinds of non-commercial partnerships are gone. So we help them do this in an effective way. I'll move quickly through this last part, BioVentures for Global Health. How do they do what they do? They have expertise in industry. They have a knowledge of global health. They were established by BIO, the trade association for the biotechnology industry, with a lot of original funding from the Gates Foundation. They help us recruit new members. They do such a good job of facilitating collaborations that I have a hard time even keeping my own slides up to date, because we have about 60 agreements now. They connect the members by how do they establish cooperations. They work very closely with each member, as I said, to find out what they're doing, where they have interest in collaborations, and where the licensors have a need and have interest in accessing something. So they do a lot of the value-added work in terms of getting to know the members and providing their information to each other. We work together on getting some good publicity for WIPO research, and I'll just show you, because this is a scientific audience, so this again is more how we market and how we build awareness of WIPO research. We have partnership storybooks where we highlight the various forms of collaboration. So this presentation gives you a little bit of a break from the heavy science that you had the rest of the day. So, but just to give you an idea of our range of activities, so collaborations between ASI, the Japanese company, Northeastern, in leishmaniasis, AstraZeneca and Stanford, diarrheal disease, Pfizer and Center for World Health and Medicine, dengue, Emory, soil-transmitted helminths, on and on. And then we also finally, we've gotten some support from two governments, Government of Australia and Government of Japan, which we've used to finance research sabbaticals for developing country researchers. Two of these, Dr. Chungwa worked on river blindness at Novartis in Basel, and Dr. Oyibo worked on malaria, also at Novartis at Basel. Out of Dr. Oyibo's more intense engagement with WIPO research, now there are two researchers from Stanford who are accessing Dr. Oyibo's lab and network to do sort of some proof of concept testing with a paper microscope technology that they want to see if can be used in a developing country setting for testing for the malaria parasite. And there's obviously a lot more behind the story in each of those slides, but I hope I gave you a quick overview as to why a UN agency for intellectual property is involved in a global health project. And I'll look forward to our panel discussion. Thank you for your attention.